Welcome to Metaphysical Life Support. My name is Naomi Eklund. With Metaphysical Life Support, we want to bring you tools that help you understand and then inspire you, that help you to see what is behind the effects of this world. Today, we are continuing our conversation with Ishtar, and you will have contact information with him at the end of this video. Ishtar is an amazing person who I met through an astrology reading, and he is extremely intuitive. He's had many, many life experiences, from near-death experiences to losing his mother early in his life to being a monk. We're going to talk about those in future interviews. Right now, what Ishtar and I are going to talk about is death and fear and the overcoming of those two things. Welcome, Ishtar.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be back here with you. Yeah.
It's a delight to be talking with you, and I would love to start out just by opening up the floor and saying you're interested in talking about death and fear and overcoming those things. I would love to just give you a chance to start talking about it, because you always have so much so many interesting things to say.
Well, thank you. Well, I'll first start out by saying that where I think we're going to talk about the near-death experience in its fullness at a later date, I will start and say that in my life, death essentially functioned as my doorway into actual life. And one of the things that the biggest lesson that I got from all of that was that, you know, even though I was young and innocent and had a fairly easy life, I realized that I'd actually been living basically a near-life experience. And I realized that pretty much everybody in my town, my family, most of the people I know were in fact living near-life experiences. I had no idea how belabored I was with this kind of existential fear. And so many of it, really a packet of different sorts of fears, and so much of them really just came down to death. Came down to this fear of annihilation.
So we're all programmed to want to save ourselves. I think that
Right.
We come born with that bit of helpful yet sometimes problematic programming. But you're talking about something that is, I think, really important for people to understand a little bit more of when you're talking about this near-life experience, sort of this moving around and sort of only really being half alive or half whole or half present. So talk a little bit about like being in that delusion or in that limited mental space, and then sort of contrast it to this non-local, more expanded space that you talk about. Can you give us a contrast so people can get an idea of how their lives might even improve?
Oh, and I can just crib it from so many people who might be watching this. You've all had experiences, I hope, of being in love, at least. There's one, much less meditation experiences, but being in love, when we're truly in love, we're so present. The colors are vibrant, the sounds are vibrant. We notice all the fine details about not just our object of affection, but everything around us, everything of life. When we fall out of love and we're in a state of self-judgment or have our buttons pushed, we're as if walking around in a cloud of thoughts. So stub your toe when you're in love and it's no bother, whatever. You might not even feel it. Stub your toe when you're in that other space. It's the straw that breaks the camel's back. And why am I alive on this miserable planet anyways? But to go deeper than that, maybe simplistic sort of explanation. We're fighting life a lot. So you're right. There's a bodily fear of death, which I think is quite helpful and stays with us. But then there's a sort of sometimes vague existential terror. There's this uneasiness, maybe a subtle inchoate uneasiness that that we all kind of feel. We don't really, we think it's normal. We take it for normal. I certainly did. I thought, oh, that's just part of being a human being, is to have that. Maybe I didn't have it when I was a child, but I guess every adult I know seems to have it. So it just seems to be something you grow into. That's part of life. That was my thinking until it was taken off. Until the uneasiness was just stripped off like saran wrap that had been on me the whole time that I just never noticed.
So this is sort of like the general anxiety disorder that so many people are experiencing, sort of that unease that can become paranoia, that can become just snapping at people because you don't know why you're snapping at them, but you just don't feel at ease.
Right. And I'll say it's actually linked to something quite profound, actually, I found out. For instance, when I was a teenager, and about 14, I had some deep mystical experiences before that, and they kind of faded. But when I was about 14, anytime my mind would become quiet, so I might be playing my drum set, which was an activity which quieted my mind naturally. I might be out playing basketball, or I might just be sitting late at night in the kitchen studying on a Sunday night when it was quiet. Anytime I'd become quiet, I started to become just terrified. I felt it felt like a vast looming presence right outside my door, right out in the other room. I thought it was a pack of ghosts. I was like, oh my God, this is the biggest ghost ever. This is because I was completely terrified. I was like, I've never felt one like this before. And years later, I realized, no, that was my own presence. That was my own consciousness. I realized that this anxiety that I was developing, just like everybody else, was really a product of trying to squeeze a naturally vast and expansive consciousness and awareness into this tight little sense of a tiny little person. In my case, it was Thomas W. Howell, who was born on this day and has these interests and likes these things and dislikes these things and is afraid of this because of that, and is afraid of that because of that, and likes this because of that. And, we all, a whole list of sorts of things. And it was just like, like in Aladdin, a giant genie in a tiny bottle, quite cramped.
So it's almost like your own soul, spirit presence was wanting your attention and your mind couldn't comprehend it, so you put up walls.
Yeah, and we put up walls because we basically, to mention the shadow again, Jung's notion of a shadow self, the repository of where we hide everything that we think is unworthy. One of his brilliant insights was that one of the first things that most of us hide is what he termed the superconscious self. And he posited that when we're children, we're naturally aware of just vast swaths, and that awareness comes to a head often with the adult world, because the adults are already conditioned, and the adults can't take what comes out of a child's mouth, so they start to shut down and become less wise and less pure and more disconnected, just like the adults. And so we have all exiled our own consciousness from ourself. We have all alienated ourselves from ourself, that.
So that's awesome the way you said that. And two things come to mind. One is the idea that to survive, we have to become like the people who provide for us. So our survival mechanism kicks in, and our survival mechanism pushes out our consciousness because, like really the human mind can perceive like 1/1,000,000th of what's even possible. And this actually ties back into our previous show when we're talking about the limbic system and the tribe and how we end up dehumanizing others because we can't, it's like we can't take all of that in. And what I'm hearing you say is that through your traumatic experiences, because trauma changes our development, and trauma can force us to say, well, to survive, I need more of my soul. And in your case, because you didn't have your mom there, you needed more of your soul. You needed also that expansion So this is fascinating. So please, I like to sort of interpret it, because I think that we all, it's almost like life is a diamond, and like if we can all look through all the different facets in our own way, then it starts to click. So I encourage the audience to like really even just pause this for a minute and let that really affect you, and reflect on it. What he said was so profound. He's talking about, to survive, we need to limit ourselves, but then that limitation becomes its own prison. And he's talking about the experience then of not being in the prison. So tell us more about not being in the prison.
um, Laughing just like that actually is maybe the best description, because it's the realization, and not really a mental realization, but a full-bodied, full psyche, full being realization of not being in the prison. It's this delightful freedom, and with that delightful freedom, there's also the sense that it's been waiting for us the whole time. That's the wonderful thing as well, is that it's been waiting for us the whole time, that we've been our own jailer. We've been the jailer. We built the prison. We did all of that. It's an ancient decision that we can't remember, but when we do slough it off and step into this sense of freedom that's already there, and that sense of freedom, but an actual openness and a wholeness, then it's glorious. And we're like children in that sense. Some of us had terrible childhoods, so it might have been from day one. It might have been a hard go from day one for many of us. Others, I was a little bit luckier. I was quite fortunate, and that for whatever reason, I had pretty good parents, and that whatever limitations they might have had didn't seem to really get passed on to me as much in those early developmental years. So there was a lot of openness and spaciousness and freedom. And for me, it was almost, my journey involved me kind of coming back to that in certain ways. And so what does that look like, stepping into that freedom? Well, there's usually spontaneousness. We usually stop editing ourselves so much. In fact, sometimes we get an idea of just how much we were editing ourselves before, because it often it's a fairly deep rabbit hole of that sort of stuff. We stop judging. We stop judging ourselves. Doesn't mean you can't say like, oh, I did a really shitty job of parking, or I'm really bad at that. That's not the judgment I'm talking about. That can be healthy evaluation, and it's good to continue to have those rational faculties to be able to evaluate things. In fact, we get better at that. It's more those silent whispers that we take on, even if our parents didn't purposely, or even if they didn't make us feel worthless. We often, as children, take on their own inner voices because we are so open and supple, flexible and fluid. We often try to help our parents unconsciously by taking on their sacks of suffering. And so those start to fall off. Those little voices of I'm not good enough. My life, there's something wrong with me. There's something wrong with this world. There's something off. That's all this extracurricular stuff that falls away. And it's just such a lightness, such a peace. And
so I hear from people that they want peace, but I also feel, and I felt this in myself, and I mean, I did have a really strange and difficult childhood, but like we were saying earlier, like everything has its light and its dark side, because we live here on earth. So even though I would say that was a difficult childhood, it also enabled me to not really bond to my abusers, which allowed me to bond to my own spirit, which made me at a very early age more reliant on the intuition and the angels and the beings that were talking to me, that were kind of like my angels were parenting me more along the lines of what my soul wanted. And you had you had both gifts and then tragedies. So I had these gifts and these tragedies. But I think one of the things I see for a lot of people is most people have an okay life. And it's neither awesome or bad. And it, like, okay, sort of like becomes like the flavor of the day, like cheap vanilla ice cream. And there's a fear of having it get too good or thinking it could get too good, because people think there has to be a tragedy to get to that place where it's too good. And I think the reason that there's so many tragedies that wake people up is because we're not willing to wake up on our own along the way. What do you think of that?
Well, sometimes that's the case. I mean, some of us can, many of us elect the path of walking through hell. And maybe fewer elect the path of walking through heaven, although that is equally there. It's just that does tend to be at least common in the United States with the people I've known, is that it's so many more people are more willing to go the other route. And yeah, I do think it has something to do with this sense of, oh, but it'll be taken away, or too good to be trueness, or something like that, or what some, I suppose, people in the coaching business call the upper limit problem. Things of that nature. People are more prone to delusions of smallness than they are to the delusions of grandeur. That it's common. I don't exactly know the mechanism for that. I do know that it's helpful to get out of that, and to let go of that, and a way out of that. So, yeah.
So I think that if maybe the question that I was trying to ask was, how do you help people not be afraid?
That's a good question right there. And, in my case, I don't want to just say meditation, but for me, that there's a strange alchemy there. And that with or without meditation throughout my life, there have been moments where instead of reeling and seizing up, from something, I relaxed and opened into something, a space inside me that was bigger than the experience. There's inside all of us, there is a space of consciousness that is bigger than the problem, any problem that's facing us. And if we can dive into that deeply and profoundly, therein lies a way out of fear. We can develop our nervous system, because it's like an instrument, really. And we're kind of taught to play it in a certain way. And the way that most of us are taught to play it is rather restrictive and rather small. And so this is why in our culture we have people going into fight or flight in ways that our body was not really designed to. Our fight or flight system was designed for the saber-toothed tiger in the Pleistocene period. That's a very useful use for the fight or flight, not somebody cutting us off in traffic when there's no danger to our life in it. And yet we do that. We're trained to do that. And that's just habit. And so, pulling ourselves out of that habit involves going into these other parts of our nervous system. There's a wonderful explanation for that, actually coming from the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who used to say that our nervous system was like a many-roomed mansion, but in our culture typically trains us to only live in about 3 of the rooms, and those rooms just happen to be the dingiest, dirtiest, and most confusing of the whole house. And so through spiritual practices, the real goal of spiritual practices is to start to allow ourselves to step into those other rooms of the house that are already there. And by doing that, so many things happen, including a reduction in the fight or flight response. And it's just magical how much that can reduce. The other strategy I've used throughout life, and especially in making decisions, was and this is a little bit, actually this one is easier said than done, was I'd always simply just look at what's the worst possible thing that could happen out of this, and can I really accept that? And I would only move on the decision when I could really accept it. How did I accept it? Probably because I had enough experience of going into that space that was bigger. So it's a little bit circular in that respect.
My experience of reducing things to zero, which is what I call what you just described, is, well, I would be dead and I wouldn't care.
There you go. There you go. One of my favorite movie clips is from Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, when they have to jump off that cliff together, and Robert Redford says, "I can't swim," and Paul Newman says, "What are you, crazy? The fall will probably kill us." And that's a koan in a certain sense. It's like a Zen koan, because that's really life. I mean, really, death is coming. Death is coming. And I'm not telling you to be like really crazy and cavalier in anyone's decisions, but I am saying that a healthy dose of, like stepping outside your front door is dangerous. Staying in your house is dangerous. It's going to get you. So why linger upon it?
So I want to pause and jump back in, because I think that we want to do another segment on this, but I don't want to make it any one segment too long. So hold that thought, because in the back of my mind, I forget what movie it is, but death is coming. It's in the back of my mind. I think we have a lot more to talk about fear and death, and how we want to respect those, but not let them control us.
Right.
Thank you, Ishtar. My name's Naomi Eklund. This has been Metaphysical Life Support. Please remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe so we can continue to bring you interesting and inspiring conversations that help us to understand ourselves, think consciously, and provide an opportunity to see things from a different point of view. We'll be right back with Ishtar. Thank you.